The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble corridors of Avalonia's royal palace as Prince Alexander walked purposefully toward his father's study. His footsteps echoed with the weight of a decision that would change everything. The ornate doors, carved with the royal crest of two golden lions, seemed heavier than usual as he pushed them open. King Edmund looked up from his mahogany desk, surprised to see his eldest son so early. The king's weathered face, marked by decades of ruling the prosperous kingdom of Avalonia, showed concern as he noticed Alexander's grim expression. "Father, we need to talk," Alexander said, his voice steady but strained. He had spent the entire night wrestling with what he was about to do, knowing it would send shockwaves through the entire royal family and the kingdom beyond. The previous evening had been the final straw. Lady Victoria, his stepmother Queen Isabel's daughter from her first marriage, had once again targeted his beloved daughter, Princess Sophia. At only 8 years old, Sophia possessed a gentle spirit and natural kindness that made her beloved by everyone in the palace except Victoria's own daughter, Lady Clarissa. Alexander's mind drifted back to the incident that had pushed him over the edge. He had found Sophia crying in the palace gardens, her white dress torn and muddy. Through her tears, she had explained how Clarissa, who was 12 and should have known better, had pushed her into the fountain during what was supposed to be a peaceful family gathering. "She said I don't belong here because my mother is dead," Sophia had whispered, her small voice breaking Alexander's heart. "She said real princesses have living mothers, not dead ones like mine." The cruelty of those words had cut deeper than any sword. Alexander's first wife, Princess Elena, had died in a riding accident when Sophia was just 3 years old. The little girl barely remembered her mother, but she treasured the few memories she had and the stories Alexander told her about Elena's kindness and grace. This wasn't the first incident. Over the past 2 years, since King Edmund had married Queen Isabel, there had been a pattern of behavior from Clarissa that everyone seemed to ignore or excuse. The palace staff whispered about it in corners, but no one dared to speak openly about the tension between the two girls. Lady Clarissa had been raised believing she would one day be queen herself, as her biological father had been a duke with significant holdings. When her mother married King Edmund, she suddenly found herself in line behind Alexander and his daughter for the throne. The adjustment had not been easy for the proud 12-year-old, who had been told her entire life that she was special and deserving of the finest things. "Alexander, sit down," King Edmund said, gesturing to the leather chair across from his desk. "You look troubled. What's weighing on your mind?" Alexander remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back in a military posture he had learned during his service with the royal guard. "It's about Sophia, father. And about what I must do to protect her." The king's expression grew more serious. He had noticed the tension in the palace, the way Queen Isabel seemed to favor her own daughter while treating Sophia with polite indifference. He had hoped it would resolve itself with time, but Alexander's demeanor suggested otherwise. "Tell me everything," the king said, leaning back in his chair. Alexander took a deep breath and began to recount not just the previous evening's incident, but months of accumulated grievances. He spoke of how Clarissa would deliberately exclude Sophia from games and activities, how she would whisper cruel comments just loud enough for Sophia to hear but quietly enough that adults couldn't quite catch the words. He described how Queen Isabel, while never directly cruel to Sophia, had made it clear through countless small actions that the child was not truly welcome in her new family structure. The way she would plan activities that included only Clarissa, the way she would give Clarissa the best tutors while suggesting that Sophia's education could wait, the way she would seat Clarissa next to the king at formal dinners while Sophia was placed at the far end of the table. "Yesterday was different, though," Alexander continued, his voice growing harder. "Clarissa didn't just say something mean. She physically pushed my daughter. And, when I confronted Queen Isabel about it, she suggested that Sophia was being dramatic and that children need to learn to handle conflict on their own." King Edmund's face darkened. As a father himself, he understood the protective instincts that drove a parent to shield their child from harm. He also understood the delicate political balance that royal marriages often required, and how that balance could sometimes put children in impossible situations. "What are you planning to do?" the king asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Alexander straightened his shoulders and looked directly into his father's eyes. "I'm renouncing my claim to the throne, father. Effective immediately." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. King Edmund had ruled for 35 years and had always assumed that Alexander, his capable and beloved eldest son, would succeed him. The prince had been groomed for leadership his entire life, had served with distinction in the military, and was respected by both the nobility and the common people of Avalonia. "Alexander, you can't be serious," the king said, rising from his chair. "You're talking about abandoning your birthright, your duty to the kingdom, because of childhood squabbles." "These aren't squabbles, father," Alexander replied firmly. "This is about the psychological welfare of my child. Sophia is being systematically bullied and marginalized in her own home. She's starting to believe that she doesn't belong here, that she's somehow less worthy of love and respect because her mother is gone." Alexander began to pace the length of the study, his emotions finally breaking through his composed exterior. "Do you know what she asked me last week? She asked if we could go live in the countryside, just the two of us, because she doesn't like feeling sad all the time. An 8-year-old child wants to run away from her own home because she's being made to feel unwelcome every single day." The king was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the weight of his son's words. He thought about his own relationship with Alexander and Alexander's younger brother, Prince Marcus, who was currently serving as an ambassador to a neighboring kingdom. He thought about the careful balance he had tried to maintain when he married Isabel, wanting to provide stability for the kingdom while also finding personal happiness after being widowed for 5 years. "Have you spoken to Isabel about this directly?" the king asked. Alexander's laugh was bitter. "Multiple times, father. She either dismisses my concerns or suggests that I'm being overprotective. She says that royal children need to develop thick skin and that coddling Sophia won't prepare her for the realities of noble life." "And what about Clarissa? Have you tried to address the situation with her?" "I've tried to be patient and understanding," Alexander said. "I know this transition has been difficult for her too. But every conversation ends the same way, with her running to her mother and claiming that I'm being mean to her. Then, Isabel confronts me about being unfair to her daughter, and the cycle continues." Alexander stopped pacing and faced his father directly. "I won't sacrifice my daughter's happiness and mental health for the sake of political convenience or family harmony. If staying in line for the throne means that Sophia has to endure years more of this treatment, then the throne isn't worth it." King Edmund understood the impossible position his son was in. As a king, he knew the importance of duty and sacrifice for the greater good. But, as a father and grandfather, he could see the pain in Alexander's eyes and could imagine the suffering that little Sophia must be experiencing. "If you renounce your claim," the king said slowly, "it would pass to Marcus. But he's not married, has no children, and has never shown particular interest in ruling. He's always been more drawn to diplomacy and scholarly pursuits." "Marcus is capable and intelligent," Alexander replied. "He could learn to rule effectively, and he could marry and provide heirs for the kingdom. But, more importantly, stepping aside would allow me to take Sophia away from this toxic situation and give her a chance to grow up without the constant stress and emotional manipulation she's facing now." The king was silent for several minutes, staring out the tall windows that overlooked the palace gardens where Sophia had been found crying the night before. He could see the fountain where she had been pushed, and the sight made his decision clearer. "What would you do if you stepped away from the succession?" he asked finally. Alexander had clearly thought this through extensively. "I would ask for a duchy in the northern provinces. There's good land there, and I could serve the kingdom in other ways while giving Sophia a peaceful environment to grow up in. She could have a normal childhood, make friends who like her for who she is rather than her title, and develop her own interests without the pressure of court politics." "And your military service? Your diplomatic connections? All the preparation you've had for leadership?" "None of it would be wasted," Alexander assured him. "I could serve as a regional governor, help with trade negotiations with our northern neighbors, and still be available if the kingdom needed my expertise in military matters. I just wouldn't be tied to the court and all the complicated dynamics that are hurting my daughter." King Edmund walked over to a portrait of his late first wife, Alexander's mother, that hung on the wall. Queen Margaret had been a woman of great wisdom and compassion, and he often wondered what she would advise in difficult situations like this one. "Your mother would have loved Sophia dearly," he said quietly. "And she would have been heartbroken to know that the child was suffering." Alexander joined his father in looking at the portrait. "Mother always said that family comes first, that our duty to each other as human beings is more important than our duty to titles and traditions. I think she would understand why I'm making this choice." The king turned back to his son, and, for a moment, Alexander could see not the ruler of Babylonia, but simply a father who was struggling with an impossible decision. King Edmund loved both his son and his new wife, but he was beginning to understand that the situation in the palace had become untenable. "I need time to think about this," the king said finally. "This decision would have implications far beyond our family. The nobles who support you, the people who expect you to be their future king, the neighboring kingdoms who have already begun building relationships with you as my heir, they would all be affected." Alexander nodded. "I understand the gravity of what I'm asking, father. But I also understand the gravity of what my daughter is enduring every day. I would rather be remembered as a prince who put his child's welfare above his own ambition than as a king who sacrificed his daughter's happiness for political convenience." As Alexander prepared to leave the study, King Edmund called out to him. "Alexander, regardless of what I decide about your request, I want you to know that I'm proud of you for being willing to fight for your daughter. That kind of courage and love is exactly what makes a good father, and it's exactly what would make you a good king." Alexander paused at the door, touched by his father's words. "Thank you, father. But sometimes being a good father means making difficult choices that others might not understand." After Alexander left, King Edmund remained in his study for hours, weighing the impossible choice before him. Outside his window, he could see Queen Isabel walking with Clarissa through the gardens, pointing out different flowers and laughing at something the girl had said. They looked like a picture of maternal happiness, but the king now wondered what he couldn't see, what was happening when no one was watching, and how his desire for a peaceful, harmonious family might have inadvertently created an environment where an innocent child was being hurt. The decision would change everything, not just for Alexander and Sophia, but for the entire kingdom of Babylonia. And, as the sun set over the palace walls, King Edmund knew that whatever choice he made would have consequences that would ripple through generations to come. 3 days had passed since Alexander's conversation with his father, and the tension in the palace had become almost unbearable. Queen Isabel had noticed the hushed conversations between the king and his advisors, the way servants looked uncomfortable when she entered rooms, and, most tellingly, the way her husband had become distant and contemplative during their evening meals together. She sat in her private sitting room, an elegant space decorated in soft blues and golds that had been redecorated to her tastes when she married the king. Clarissa was with her tutors, studying languages and history, and Isabel found herself alone with her thoughts for the first time in days. The queen was not a cruel woman by nature, but she was ambitious and protective of her daughter's interests. When she had married King Edmund, she had genuinely hoped to create a harmonious blended family. However, she had underestimated how difficult it would be to navigate the complex emotions and loyalties that came with royal stepfamily dynamics. Clarissa had struggled with the transition from being her mother's only focus to sharing attention with not only a new stepfather but also a stepdaughter who held a higher position in the line of succession. Isabel had watched her confident, outgoing daughter become increasingly moody and resentful, and she had made the mistake of thinking that this was simply a normal adjustment period that would resolve itself with time. What she hadn't fully understood was how her own subtle behaviors had contributed to the problem. When she planned activities that excluded Sophia, she told herself she was helping Clarissa feel special and secure. When she gave Clarissa advantages in education or seating arrangements, she justified it as making sure her own daughter didn't feel overshadowed by her higher-ranking stepdaughter. But Alexander's increasingly direct confrontations had forced her to examine her actions more critically, and she was beginning to see how her efforts to protect Clarissa had inadvertently created an environment where Sophia felt unwelcome and unloved. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, and was surprised to see King Edmund enter. His expression was serious, and she felt a chill of apprehension. "Isabel, we need to talk," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "It's about our family," and about some decisions that need to be made. She set down her embroidery and gave him her full attention. Of course, my love. What's troubling you? Edmund took a deep breath, knowing that the conversation he was about to have would be one of the most difficult of his marriage. Alexander has asked me to allow him to renounce his claim to the throne. The words hit Isabel like a physical blow. She had known there was tension between Alexander and their family dynamics, but she hadn't realized it had escalated to this level. What? Why would he? What's brought this on? The situation with Sophia and Clarissa has reached a breaking point, Edmund said carefully. Alexander believes that his daughter is being systematically bullied and excluded, and he's willing to give up his birthright to protect her from further harm. Isabel felt her defenses rising immediately. Bullied? That's a very strong word, Edmund. Children have conflicts, yes, but calling it bullying seems rather dramatic. The king studied his wife's face, seeing the mixture of shock, denial, and growing defensiveness in her eyes. Is it dramatic, Isabel? Alexander described specific incidents to me. The pushing at the fountain, the cruel comments about Sophia's mother, the deliberate exclusion from activities. He also mentioned that you've suggested these are normal childhood conflicts that Sophia needs to learn to handle on her own. Children need to develop resilience, Isabel said, but her voice was less certain than before. Royal children especially need to learn that life isn't always fair and that they can't expect everything to be handed to them. Sophia is 8 years old, Edmund replied firmly. She's not seeking special treatment. She's seeking basic kindness and acceptance in her own home. And, according to Alexander, she's not getting it. Isabel stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where both girls had played just yesterday. The memory took on a different tone now as she recalled how Clarissa had insisted on playing a game that required partners, knowing full well that Sophia had no one to pair with since the other children present were all Clarissa's friends. I've tried to create a balanced environment, Isabel said, though she was beginning to sound less convinced of her own actions. Clarissa has had to adjust to so many changes. She went from being an only child with all my attention to sharing her home with a stepfather and stepsister. I've been trying to make sure she doesn't feel displaced or unloved. And, in the process, you've displaced and made Sophia feel unloved, Edmund said, not unkindly but with absolute clarity. I understand your instinct to protect your daughter, Isabel. But protection shouldn't come at the cost of another child's emotional well-being. The Queen felt tears beginning to form in her eyes as she faced the truth she had been avoiding. I didn't mean for it to happen this way. I thought that if I made sure Clarissa felt secure and confident, she would naturally become more accepting of Sophia. I thought that showing Clarissa special attention would help her adjust to sharing our family. Instead, it taught her that she could compete with Sophia for affection and status, and that she could win that competition by making Sophia feel small and unwanted, Edmund said. And now Alexander is prepared to walk away from the throne rather than subject his daughter to years more of this treatment. Isabel turned back to face her husband, and he could see the genuine distress in her face. What can we do? How can we fix this? I never wanted to drive Alexander away, and I certainly never wanted to hurt Sophia. Edmund rose and went to stand beside his wife. The first step is acknowledging that there is a problem that needs to be addressed. Not minimized, not explained away, but genuinely addressed. Sophia is being harmed by the current dynamics in our family, and that needs to stop immediately. What does that mean, practically speaking? Isabel asked. It means that Clarissa needs to understand that her behavior toward Sophia is unacceptable and has serious consequences. It means that you and I need to model inclusive behavior that shows both girls they are equally valued and loved. And it means that we need to create an environment where Sophia feels safe and protected in her own home. Isabel nodded slowly, though she looked overwhelmed by the magnitude of the changes being suggested. And if we do all of that, will Alexander reconsider his decision? I don't know, Edmund admitted. The damage that's been done runs deep, and trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild. Alexander has lost faith in our family's ability to protect and nurture his daughter. Regaining that trust would require not just promises of change, but sustained, consistent proof that things are truly different. That evening, the royal family gathered for dinner in the smaller, informal dining room rather than the grand banquet hall. It was meant to be a more intimate setting, but the atmosphere was tense and awkward. Alexander sat next to Sophia, who seemed smaller and quieter than usual. Queen Isabel sat with Clarissa, and King Edmund presided over the table with a heavy heart. Clarissa, sensing that something was wrong but not understanding what, chattered nervously about her lessons and her plans for the next day. Sophia responded to direct questions politely but volunteered nothing, keeping her eyes on her plate and speaking so quietly that others had to strain to hear her. Alexander watched his daughter's behavior with growing concern. This withdrawn, anxious child was so different from the happy, energetic girl Sophia had been just a year ago. The change had been gradual enough that he hadn't fully recognized how dramatic it was until he really focused on her demeanor. "Sophia," Queen Isabel said suddenly, and everyone at the table looked up. "I was thinking that perhaps you and Clarissa might enjoy planning a small party for next week. We could invite some of the other children from court, have games and sweets, make it a special celebration." Sophia looked uncertain, glancing at her father before responding. "What kind of party, Your Majesty?" "Whatever kind you girls would enjoy," Isabel said, making a conscious effort to include both children equally. "You could choose the theme together, decide on activities, help plan the menu. It could be something you work on as partners." Clarissa's expression immediately became sulky. "I already planned a party last month with my friends from the academy. Why do we need another party? And why does Sophia get to help plan it?" The response was exactly what Alexander had expected, and he felt his resolve to leave court strengthening. But before he could say anything, King Edmund spoke up firmly. "Clarissa, that's enough. Queen Isabel is offering to include both you and Sophia in planning a celebration that you could both enjoy. Your response shows exactly the kind of attitude that needs to change." Clarissa looked shocked. She was accustomed to having her preferences catered to and her complaints taken seriously. Being corrected so directly by the king, in front of everyone, was a new and uncomfortable experience. "But I don't understand why Sophia gets to make decisions about a party in my home," Clarissa protested, and Isabel winced at her daughter's words. "This is Sophia's home too," Alexander said, his voice carefully controlled but with an edge of steel. "She has every bit as much right to be here and to participate in family activities as you do. More right, actually, since this palace has been her home since birth while you've lived here for less than 2 years." "Alexander," Queen Isabel said cautiously, "perhaps we could—" "No," Alexander interrupted. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. Every time Clarissa says something hurtful or exclusionary, someone makes excuses for her or tries to smooth things over without addressing the real problem. Clarissa just referred to this palace as her home while implying that Sophia is a guest who shouldn't have input into family decisions. That attitude is unacceptable." Sophia had gone even quieter during this exchange, clearly uncomfortable with being the center of conflict. She looked up at her father with wide, sad eyes and whispered, "Papa, may I please be excused? I'm not very hungry." The sight of his daughter's distress was the final straw for Alexander. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the stone floor. "Yes, darling, you may be excused. Go up to your room, and I'll come read with you shortly." As Sophia left the dining room, her small figure disappearing through the ornate doorway, the remaining adults sat in uncomfortable silence. Clarissa looked confused and somewhat frightened by the tension she had created but didn't seem to understand. Queen Isabel appeared to be fighting back tears. King Edmund looked resigned and tired. "I've made my decision, Father," Alexander said quietly. "Tomorrow I'll draft the formal documents renouncing my claim to the throne. I'll also submit a request for the Duchy of Northwind, along with a transfer schedule that will allow Marcus time to return from his diplomatic mission and begin preparing for his eventual succession." "Alexander, please," Queen Isabel said, her voice breaking. "Give us a chance to make things right. I know I've made mistakes, but I can learn, I can do better." Alexander looked at her with a mixture of sadness and skepticism. Isabel, I've been asking you to do better for months. I've explained the situation, pointed out specific problems, and requested specific changes. Instead of improvement, things have gotten worse. Sophia is withdrawing from family life, she's anxious and unhappy, and tonight she couldn't even stay at the dinner table because the atmosphere was so hostile. He gestured toward the door where Sophia had exited. My daughter asked me last week if we could move away because she doesn't like feeling sad all the time. An 8-year-old child wants to leave her ancestral home because she's being made to feel unwelcome by her own family. I won't let that continue. King Edmund stood as well, knowing that the evening had reached its conclusion. Alexander, I respect your decision and your reasons for making it. If you're determined to proceed, I'll support you. But I want you to take one more week to think it over. Once the papers are signed and announced, there's no going back. Alexander nodded. 1 week, father. But, unless something dramatic changes, my mind is made up. As the family dispersed for the evening, each member went to their private quarters with heavy hearts and troubled thoughts. In her room, Sophia sat by her window looking out at the stars, wondering if children in other places felt as sad as she did. In his chambers, Alexander began drafting letters to various nobles and officials, preparing them for the shocking news that would soon reshape the kingdom's future. Queen Isabel sat in her sitting room, finally, allowing herself to cry as she confronted the reality of what her actions had cost not just Alexander and Sophia, but her husband and the entire royal family. And, in his study, King Edmund stared at portraits of his ancestors, wondering if he was witnessing the end of a dynasty or the beginning of a new chapter in Avalonia's history. The week ahead would determine which it would be. The morning of the 4th day brought an unexpected visitor to the palace. Prince Marcus had returned early from his diplomatic mission, summoned by an urgent message from his father. As his carriage rolled through the palace gates, Marcus noticed an unusual tension among the staff and guards. Conversation stopped when he passed, and the normally cheerful atmosphere of his childhood home felt subdued and anxious. Marcus was 26, 2 years younger than Alexander, and possessed a thoughtful, scholarly nature that complemented his brother's more direct, military bearing. Where Alexander had trained for leadership through service and duty, Marcus had developed his skills through study, travel, and diplomatic service. He had always been content to serve as the spare heir, pursuing his interests in international relations and cultural studies while supporting his brother's preparation for eventual rule. As he entered the palace, he was immediately greeted by his father's private secretary, who informed him that King Edmund requested his presence in the study immediately. The urgency of the summons, combined with the strange atmosphere in the palace, filled Marcus with apprehension as he made his way through the familiar corridors. King Edmund looked older than Marcus remembered, and the strain of the past week was evident in the lines around his eyes and the tension in his shoulders. Marcus, thank you for coming so quickly. Please, sit down. We have much to discuss. Father, what's happened? Your message was urgent but gave no details. Is someone ill? Is the kingdom in danger? Edmund gestured to a chair and waited for Marcus to settle before beginning. The kingdom is stable, and no one is physically ill, but our family is facing a crisis that could change everything. Alexander has informed me that he intends to renounce his claim to the throne. Marcus felt as though the floor had shifted beneath him. Of all the possible crises he had imagined during his journey home, this had never occurred to him. What? Why would Alexander? He's been preparing for this his entire life. He's perfect for the role. What could possibly have driven him to such a decision? King Edmund spent the next hour explaining the situation with Sophia, the family dynamics that had developed since his marriage to Queen Isabel, and the escalating conflicts that had led to Alexander's ultimatum. As Marcus listened, his expression grew increasingly troubled. I knew there were some adjustments when you remarried, Marcus said finally. But I had no idea things had become so serious. When I visited 6 months ago, everything seemed fine on the surface. That's part of the problem, Edmund replied. On the surface, things have appeared manageable. But, underneath, a young child has been suffering, and Alexander has reached the end of his patience with trying to work within the system to protect her. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, absorbing the implications of what he had learned. Father, you're telling me this because if Alexander follows through with his decision, I would become your heir. Yes. And, I need to know if you would be prepared to take on that responsibility, or if you would prefer that I consider other options for the succession. The weight of the potential future settled on Marcus's shoulders like a physical burden. He had always known it was theoretically possible that he might inherit, but the likelihood had seemed so remote that he had never seriously prepared for it. What other options are there? I have cousins who could potentially inherit, though they're distant relatives, and it would create a constitutional crisis. Or I could name Alexander's daughter Sophia as my heir, though she's still a child and would need a regency council for many years. Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out at the kingdom he might one day rule. What does Alexander say about my potential inheritance? Does he believe I could do the job effectively? He has complete confidence in your abilities, Edmund assured him. He pointed out that you're intelligent, well-educated, and have extensive diplomatic experience. He believes you could learn the necessary skills and that your temperament might actually be better suited to modern kingship than his more traditional military approach. But, I'm not married, I have no heirs, and I've never shown much interest in the ceremonial aspects of royal life, Marcus pointed out. The nobles who have been cultivating relationships with Alexander would need to start over with me. Our neighboring kingdoms would need to recalibrate their diplomatic strategies. The entire political landscape would shift. All of that is true, Edmund acknowledged. But kingdoms have survived such transitions before, and the alternative is losing Alexander entirely, which would be equally disruptive. Marcus turned from the window. I need to talk to Alexander myself. I need to understand exactly what's been happening and whether there's any possibility of resolving this without such drastic action. Of course. But, Marcus, I want you to understand that Alexander's decision isn't impulsive or emotional. He's been dealing with this situation for months, trying to find solutions that would protect his daughter while maintaining family harmony. He's only considering this extreme step because everything else has failed. An hour later, Marcus found Alexander in the palace training yard, working through sword forms with an intensity that suggested he was using physical activity to manage emotional stress. Marcus had always admired his older brother's athletic abilities and military bearing, and seeing Alexander's obvious distress made the gravity of the situation even more real. "Brother," Marcus called out as he approached. "Father told me you were back. Can we talk?" Alexander lowered his sword and turned to face Marcus, and the younger prince could immediately see the strain and exhaustion in his brother's face. "Of course. Though I assume Father has already explained what's happening." They walked together to a quiet corner of the training yard, where they could speak privately. He explained the situation, yes, Marcus said. "But I want to hear it from you. Help me understand why you're willing to give up everything you've worked for." Alexander was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "Marcus, do you remember what it was like when Mother died?" The question caught Marcus off guard. Their mother, Queen Margaret, had died when Marcus was 15 and Alexander was 17. "Of course I remember. It was devastating for all of us. Do you remember how Father protected us during that time? How he made sure we had everything we needed emotionally and practically? How he never let anyone make us feel like we were burdens or that our grief was inconvenient? Yes, he was wonderful. We couldn't have asked for a better father during such a difficult time." Sophia lost her mother when she was 3, Alexander continued. "She has even fewer memories of Elena than we had of Mother, and she's been trying to navigate that loss while also adapting to a completely restructured family. Instead of receiving the extra love and support she needs, she's been made to feel like an outsider in her own home." Alexander's voice grew harder as he continued. "Every day, she's reminded that she's different, that she doesn't have a living mother like Clarissa does, that she's somehow less deserving of attention and affection. She's 8 years old, Marcus. She shouldn't have to fight for basic kindness from her own family." Marcus could hear the pain and anger in his brother's voice, and he began to understand the depth of the problem. "Have you tried working with Queen Isabel and Clarissa to address these issues directly?" Countless times, Alexander replied. I've had gentle conversations, firm discussions, and heated arguments. I've explained the problem from every angle I can think of. But nothing changes because Queen Isabel doesn't believe there's a real problem, and Clarissa has learned that she can get away with treating Sophia badly as long as she's not too obvious about it. They walked in silence for a few minutes before Marcus asked, "What would it take for you to reconsider this decision?" Alexander stopped walking and looked directly at his brother. Genuine, sustained change that proves Sophia's well-being is being prioritized. Not promises or temporary improvements that fade once the attention dies down, but fundamental shifts in behavior that show Sophia she's truly valued and protected. And you don't believe that's possible? I've been hoping for it for months, Marcus. But hope without evidence becomes delusion after a while. I can't continue to subject my daughter to this treatment just because I hope things might eventually get better. That evening, Marcus requested a private meeting with Queen Isabel. He found her in her sitting room, looking pale and anxious. She had clearly been crying, and the confident, composed woman he remembered from previous visits was nowhere to be seen. "Marcus, I'm so glad you're here," she said as he entered. "Perhaps you can help your brother see reason. This whole situation has gotten so out of hand." Marcus took a seat across from her, studying her face carefully. "Queen Isabel, I'm here to understand what's been happening, not to take sides. Can you help me see this situation from your perspective?" Isabel seemed relieved to have someone willing to listen to her side of the story. "I've been trying so hard to create a harmonious family," she began. "When I married your father, I knew it would be complicated, blending two families with children who had very different backgrounds and expectations." She went on to explain her reasoning for many of the decisions that had upset Alexander, describing her attempts to help Clarissa adjust while not overwhelming Sophia with too much attention. As she spoke, Marcus began to see how well-intentioned actions had created unintended consequences. "I think the problem," Marcus said carefully when she finished, "is that you've been trying to solve Clarissa's adjustment issues without fully considering how your solutions were affecting Sophia. In trying to make sure Clarissa didn't feel displaced, you inadvertently displaced Sophia instead." Isabel was quiet for a long moment. "I'm beginning to see that," she admitted. "But surely we can fix this without Alexander taking such drastic action. Surely we can learn to do better." "Can you?" Marcus asked directly. "Can you honestly tell me that you're prepared to make Sophia's emotional well-being a priority, even when that might mean disappointing Clarissa or requiring her to change behaviors she's become comfortable with?" The question hung in the air as Isabel struggled with her answer. Marcus could see the conflict in her face as she wrestled with her divided loyalties and the recognition of what real change would require. Finally, she nodded. "Yes, I think I can. I think I have to. But I don't know if Alexander will believe me, given how badly I've handled things so far." Marcus spent the rest of his first day back having similar conversations with various family members and palace staff. He spoke with Sophia herself, gently drawing out her perspective on the family dynamics and her feelings about her place in the palace. The conversation broke his heart as he realized how much the young girl had been suffering in silence. He also had a difficult conversation with Clarissa, who initially seemed to view him as an ally who might help her avoid consequences for her behavior. As Marcus listened to her explanations and justifications, he began to understand how an intelligent but immature 12-year-old had learned to manipulate situations to her advantage while avoiding accountability for the harm she caused. By the end of the day, Marcus had a clear picture of the family dynamics that had driven his brother to such an extreme decision. He also had the beginnings of an idea for a possible solution, though he wasn't sure if it would be enough to change Alexander's mind. That night, as the family gathered for what might be their last dinner together with the current succession intact, Marcus made an unexpected announcement. "I've been thinking about this situation all day," he said, addressing the table formally. "And I've realized that we're dealing with two separate but related problems. The first is the immediate issue of Sophia's well-being and safety in this family. The second is the long-term question of how our family can function effectively while honoring everyone's needs and feelings." Everyone at the table looked at him with surprise and curiosity. Marcus rarely took charge of family discussions, preferring to observe and offer quiet counsel when asked. "I have a proposal," Marcus continued. "But it will require commitments from everyone at this table, and it will require accepting some uncomfortable truths about how we've been operating as a family." Alexander looked skeptical but interested. "What kind of proposal?" Marcus took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to suggest would challenge everyone in the room. "A complete restructuring of our family dynamic, with professional guidance, measurable goals, and clear consequences for anyone who fails to meet their commitments. And if those commitments aren't met within a reasonable timeframe, I'll support your decision to step away from the succession." The proposal was bold, specific, and unlike anything the royal family had ever considered. As Marcus began to outline his ideas in detail, the fate of the kingdom's future hung in the balance, dependent on whether a fractured family could find a way to heal itself before it was too late. Marcus's proposal was unlike anything the royal family had ever considered. As he spoke that evening, outlining his vision for restructuring their family dynamics, the room fell into a tense silence. His plan was comprehensive and demanding, requiring each family member to acknowledge their failures and commit to specific, measurable changes. First, Marcus explained, "We bring in professional guidance. There's a renowned family counselor in the capital, Dr. Helena Ashworth, who specializes in complex family dynamics and child psychology. She would work with us individually and as a group to address the underlying issues that have created this toxic environment." Queen Isabel shifted uncomfortably. The royal family has never sought outside psychological assistance. It would be unprecedented, and the implications for public perception would be far less damaging than the crown prince renouncing his birthright because his family failed to protect his daughter, Marcus replied firmly. "We're not talking about making this public. We're talking about private, confidential sessions designed to help us function as a healthy family." Alexander remained skeptical but was listening intently. "What else would this restructuring involve?" "Clear boundaries and consequences," Marcus continued. "Clarissa would need to understand that her behavior toward Sophia has been unacceptable and harmful. She would need to make genuine amends and demonstrate sustained change in how she treats her stepsister. If she cannot or will not do this, then she would face real consequences, including potentially being sent to boarding school where her behavior could be properly supervised and corrected." Clarissa, who had been quiet throughout the evening, finally spoke up. "Why should I have to change everything just because she's too sensitive? I haven't done anything that bad." The response was exactly what Alexander had expected, and he felt his resolve to leave strengthening. But before he could respond, King Edmund spoke with an authority that surprised everyone at the table. "Clarissa, that attitude is exactly the problem," the king said firmly. "You have consistently shown cruelty toward a child who has done nothing to deserve it except exist in the same family as you. Your behavior has been documented, witnessed, and explained to you multiple times. Continuing to deny responsibility shows that you haven't learned anything from this situation." Clarissa looked shocked at being addressed so directly by the king. She turned to her mother for support, but Queen Isabel was looking down at her plate, clearly struggling with her own conflicted emotions. Marcus continued with his proposal. "Queen Isabel, you would need to demonstrate through actions, not just words, that Sophia's well-being is as important to you as Clarissa's. This would mean actively including Sophia in decision-making, ensuring she receives equal opportunities and attention, and, most importantly, consistently protecting her from further mistreatment." "I want to do that," Isabel said quietly. "I've already begun to see how my actions have contributed to this problem. But how do I prove that my commitment is genuine?" "Through sustained behavior over time," Alexander answered. "Not grand gestures or dramatic promises, but consistent daily choices that show Sophia she matters as much as Clarissa does." Marcus nodded. "And there would need to be regular check-ins with Dr. Ashworth to assess progress and address any backsliding before it becomes a pattern again. This wouldn't be a short-term fix followed by a return to old habits. It would be a permanent commitment to healthier family dynamics." King Edmund had been listening carefully to his younger son's proposal, and he found himself impressed by the thoughtfulness and comprehensiveness of the plan. Marcus, this is clearly something you've put considerable thought into. But, what makes you believe it would work when previous attempts at change have failed? Because previous attempts have relied on good intentions and informal agreements, Marcus replied. People can easily rationalize backsliding when there's no external accountability or clear measurement of success. Dr. Ashworth would provide objective assessment and guidance, and everyone would know exactly what behaviors are expected and what consequences follow if those expectations aren't met. Alexander was quiet for several minutes, considering his brother's proposal. The plan addressed many of his concerns about accountability and sustained change, but he was still skeptical about whether the family could truly transform their dynamics after months of entrenched patterns. What would the timeline be for this restructuring? Alexander asked finally. 6 months of intensive work with Dr. Ashworth, Marcus replied. Monthly family sessions, individual counseling for each family member, and specific behavioral goals that would be assessed regularly. At the end of 6 months, if the family dynamics have genuinely improved and Sophia feels safe and valued in her home, then you would reconsider your decision to renounce the throne. And if the changes don't hold, or if people revert to old patterns? Alexander pressed. Then, I would fully support your decision to step away from the succession, and I would accept the responsibility of becoming father's heir, Marcus said solemnly. This proposal only works if everyone understands that the stakes are real and the consequences for failure are serious. Queen Isabel looked up from her plate, tears visible in her eyes. Alexander, I know I've failed Sophia, and I know I've failed you. But, please, give us this chance to make things right. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove that we can be the family that both girls deserve. For the first time since the conversation began, Sophia spoke up in her small, quiet voice. Papa, what does it mean when you renounce your throne? Would we have to leave the palace? Alexander's heart broke a little as he realized that his daughter had been listening to adult conversations and trying to understand concepts far beyond her years. It means that Uncle Marcus would become the heir instead of me, and, yes, we would probably move to a different home where it would just be the two of us. Sophia considered this for a moment. Would I still be a princess if we left? You would always be a princess, darling, Alexander assured her. But, you would live in a quieter place where you could just be yourself without worrying about court politics or complicated family situations. Could I visit Uncle Marcus sometimes if he became the heir? And, could Grandpapa visit us in our new home? The innocence of her questions and her obvious love for the family members who had protected her made the adults around the table realize the full impact of what they were considering. Sophia wasn't asking to be removed from her extended family entirely, she was simply trying to understand how she could maintain the relationships that mattered to her while escaping the ones that caused her pain. Marcus leaned forward and spoke directly to his niece. Sophia, if Papa decides to take you away from the palace, you could visit as often as you wanted. And if we can find a way to make this home feel safe and happy for you, would you prefer to stay here with all of us? Sophia looked around the table at the adults who were watching her so intently. I would like to stay if Clarissa could be nice to me and if Queen Isabel could like me the same way she likes Clarissa. But, I don't want to stay if people are going to be mean to me or make me feel sad all the time. Her honest response cut through all the political and emotional complications of the situation and reduced it to its essential core, a child's need for safety, kindness, and belonging in her own home. King Edmund cleared his throat. I think Marcus's proposal deserves serious consideration. However, I want to add one additional condition. If we proceed with this plan, and if at any point during the 6-month period Sophia indicates that she feels unsafe or unhappy, Alexander would be free to withdraw from the process immediately and proceed with his original decision. That's fair, Marcus agreed. Sophia's well-being is the entire point of this exercise. If she's not benefiting from the changes, then there's no reason to continue. Alexander looked around the table at his family, weighing his options carefully. He had come into this week determined to protect his daughter at any cost, and that determination hadn't wavered. But his brother's proposal offered a path that might allow him to protect Sophia while also maintaining the family connections that were important to her. I need some time to think about this, Alexander said finally. And I need to discuss it privately with Sophia to make sure she understands what would be involved and feels comfortable with trying this approach. Of course, King Edmund replied. Take all the time you need. 3 days later, Dr. Helena Ashworth arrived at the palace for her first consultation with the royal family. She was a distinguished woman in her 50s with extensive experience in family therapy and conflict resolution. Her reputation for discretion and effectiveness had made her the choice of several noble families dealing with similar issues, though never at the royal level. After meeting individually with each family member, Dr. Ashworth presented her assessment to King Edmund and Alexander privately. The situation is serious but not irreparable, she told them. Sophia is showing signs of emotional distress consistent with prolonged exposure to a hostile environment, but she's resilient and could recover well with proper support. Clarissa is displaying learned behaviors that can be changed with consistent boundaries and consequences, though it will require her to give up some privileges and attitudes she's become comfortable with. She paused before continuing. Queen Isabel presents the most complex case. She genuinely wants to improve the situation, but she's struggling with divided loyalties and some deeply ingrained patterns of thinking about family dynamics. The work with her will need to address not just her behavior towards Sophia, but her fundamental understanding of what it means to be a stepmother to a vulnerable child. Alexander listened carefully to the assessment. Do you believe the changes necessary for Sophia's well-being are achievable within 6 months? With full commitment from all family members and consistent accountability, yes, I believe significant improvement is possible within that timeframe, Dr. Ashworth replied. However, I want to be clear that this will require genuine effort and sacrifice from everyone involved. Old patterns of behavior don't change easily, especially when they've been reinforced over months or years. After extensive discussions with Sophia, who expressed cautious hope that things could get better, Alexander made his decision. He would give his family 6 months to prove that they could create a safe, loving environment for his daughter. If they succeeded, he would continue preparing for his eventual role as king. If they failed, he would renounce his claim and take Sophia to a quieter life in the northern provinces. The months that followed tested every member of the royal family in ways they had never been tested before. Dr. Ashworth's sessions were intense and often uncomfortable, forcing each person to confront their own contributions to the family's dysfunction and commit to specific changes. Clarissa struggled the most with the new expectations and boundaries. Accustomed to being able to manipulate situations to her advantage, she found it difficult to accept that her behavior towards Sophia had consequences that couldn't be explained away or minimized. Several times during the process, she tested the limits of the new system, only to discover that the adults were now serious about enforcing consistent standards. Queen Isabel worked hard to understand and change her own patterns of favoritism and exclusion. With Dr. Ashworth's guidance, she began to see how her desire to protect Clarissa had inadvertently taught her daughter that she could compete with Sophia for affection and status. Learning to treat both girls with genuine equality required her to examine and change deeply held assumptions about stepfamily dynamics. Alexander remained vigilant throughout the process, carefully monitoring his daughter's emotional state and progress. He was pleasantly surprised to see gradual but genuine improvements in how Sophia was treated and included in family activities. More importantly, he could see his daughter beginning to relax and open up again, slowly returning to the happy, confident child she had been before the family conflicts began. 6 months after Marcus's proposal, Dr. Ashworth presented her final assessment to the family. Sophia had shown remarkable improvement in her emotional well-being and sense of security within the family. Clarissa had learned to treat her stepsister with respect and kindness, though it remained to be seen whether these changes would persist without continued professional oversight. Queen Isabel had demonstrated sustained commitment to treating both girls equally and had developed a genuine affection for Sophia that went beyond mere obligation. Most importantly, the palace had become a place where Sophia felt safe, valued, and loved. She was participating enthusiastically in family activities, expressing her opinions and preferences without fear, and had regained the joy and confidence that had been missing for so long. On a sunny morning in spring, exactly 6 months and 1 week after Marcus had first proposed his restructuring plan, Alexander made his final decision. In a private ceremony with just his immediate family present, he reaffirmed his commitment to his role as heir to the throne of Avalonia. Standing in the same study where he had first told his father about his intention to renounce his claim, Alexander reflected on the journey his family had taken together. The process hadn't been easy, and there were still challenges ahead as they worked to maintain the positive changes they had achieved. But, for the first time in months, he felt confident that his daughter would grow up in an environment that nurtured and protected her. Sophia, now 9 years old and visibly happier than she had been in over a year, stood beside her father during the ceremony. When King Edmund asked her if she was happy to be staying in the palace, she smiled brightly and said, "Yes, Grandpapa. This feels like home again." As the royal family of Avalonia moved forward into their future, they carried with them the hard-won knowledge that love, commitment, and professional guidance could heal even the deepest family wounds. The crown would pass to Alexander when the time came, and he would rule with the wisdom that comes from understanding the true cost of protecting those who matter most. The kingdom prospered under the leadership of a royal family that had learned to value kindness, inclusion, and genuine care for each other's well-being. And, in years to come, when Princess Sophia told the story of her childhood to her own children, it would be a tale not of pain and exclusion, but of healing, growth, and the power of families to change for the better when love demands it.